I'm sorry, sir. We have no rooms available.
Why do people like watching guest lights work at a place that welcomes them?
Sir, if you don't leave now, security will escort you out. Then let's make sure the right person sees it happen.
Mr. Holloway, do you understand who you just tried to remove?
He's a guest causing disturbance.
No.
You didn't fail because you didn't know who I was. You failed because you thought I was nobody. You're done here.
Sometimes, the greatest test of our character isn't how we treat powerful people, it's how we treat those we believe have nothing to offer us. A single moment of kindness can change a life, while a single act of prejudice can reveal who we truly are. Today's story is a powerful reminder that dignity should never depend on appearance, wealth, or status. Now, let's step into this unforgettable story together, but first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment on the moments that touched you the most.
That was the first thing Elias Bardwell noticed. When the town car rolled to a stop under the porte-cochere of the Ashworth crest, the small, almost invisible failure of a man in a maroon vest who looked at the back window, saw a sleeping child, and a passenger in a plain gray coat, and decided the moment did not require him to move. Elias opened the door himself. He shifted 9-year-old Nora against his shoulder, found his footing on the wet pavement, and walked into his own hotel the way a stranger walks, into a building he is not sure will let him stay. It was 11:47 at night. Rain had been falling over the city for 6 hours, fine and constant, the kind that didn't announce itself so much as settle into everything: coats, hair, the hush inside a lobby that should have felt like relief. Nora stirred against his neck. "Are we there, Daddy?" "Almost, baby. Just a few more steps." She didn't open her eyes. She trusted his voice more than her own awareness of the world, which was, Elias thought, exactly what a 9-year-old should be allowed to do. Her small fist was curled into the collar of his coat, and tucked under her other arm was Pepper, a thinning, one-eared rabbit that had outlived 3 Christmases and a dozen threats of being lost at airports. The Ashworth Crest lobby unfolded in front of him exactly the way he remembered designing it 4 years ago. Limestone floors the color of wet sand, brass fixtures that caught the chandelier light, without shouting about it, a quiet runner of dark green carpet leading to a front desk built from a single slab of walnut. He had picked that walnut himself in a lumber yard outside Asheville because he wanted people to walk up to that desk and feel like they were approaching something solid, something that wouldn't let them down. He had not set foot in this building in 5 months. He came back this way on purpose. No town car logo, no assistant trailing 2 steps behind, no name on a reservation. Just a man in a plain coat carrying his daughter past midnight, the way most of his guests actually arrived. Tired, unimpressive, hoping someone would be kind. The young woman behind the desk, nameplate reading Priya, glanced up, and her expression did the thing Elias had watched happen in 100 lobbies. Over the years, the small recalibration, that took less than a second and changed everything that followed. Coat, child, no luggage carried by anyone but him. She didn't say anything cruel. She didn't have to. "Good evening," he said. "I need a room for the night. Just the 2 of us." "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "No. We just got off a late flight." "Anything will do." Priya's eyes moved to her screen, then back to him, then, for half a second too long, to the lobby behind him, as if checking who else might be watching this exchange. "I'm so sorry, sir, we're fully booked tonight." Elias had heard that sentence delivered with real apology before. This was not that. This had the flat, rehearsed shape of a door closing before it had even finished opening. No rooms at all, not even something basic. "Nothing available, I'm afraid." He nodded slowly, shifting Nora's weight, and stepped to the side of the desk rather than away from it. Close enough to wait, not so close as to crowd her. 3 minutes later, the revolving door spun behind him, and a man and woman walked in laughing about something from dinner, shaking rain off an umbrella they hadn't bothered opening until the last block. No bags, no reservation, as it turned out, because Elias heard the woman say so cheerfully to Priya, and within 90 seconds, 2 key cards were sliding across the walnut counter. He watched Priya's whole posture change for them. Lighter shoulders. A real laugh at something the man said. The kind of warmth a person can't fake convincingly for more than a few seconds, which meant she wasn't faking it now, and hadn't been faking the door she'd just closed on him, either. That was the part that stayed with Elias. She believed both things were true. She believed there was nothing for him, and she believed, completely, that there was plenty for them. He did not raise his voice. He had learned a long time ago, from a man who never raised his, that volume was usually a substitute for leverage, and he had no interest in substitutes tonight. "I'd like to speak to your manager," he said. While he waited, he did the thing he had trained himself to do on every quiet night for the better part of a decade. He said nothing, and he watched. He pulled out his phone, not to call anyone yet, but to open a small internal app almost no one outside corporate compliance knew existed. The mystery guest log, a tool he'd built years ago specifically for nights like this. He logged the timestamp. He logged Priya's name from her badge. He logged the words "fully booked" and the 4 minutes that had passed before 2 unreserved walk-ins received keys. It wasn't proof of malice. It didn't need to be yet. It was simply the first entry in a record he intended to either close quietly or use loudly, depending on what happened next. Elias Bardwell had built Ashworth Hospitality Group out of a single, failing motor in off a state highway in Georgia, the kind of place with a flickering vacancy sign and carpet that smelled like 40 years of other people's cigarettes. He was 26 when he bought it, with money he didn't fully have, using a small business loan a white loan officer had almost declined twice before a regional manager, a woman named Carol Webb, whom Elias still sent flowers to every February, overruled him. 14 years later, there were 19 Ashworth properties across 9 states, and the Crest was the flagship, the one with his name quietly engraved on a brass plate near the service elevator that almost no guest ever saw. He had cut the ribbon himself. He had personally interviewed the original general manager. He had stood in this exact lobby and told his first hires that this building would never become the kind of place that made people feel small in order to feel impressive. His own father, Thaddeus Bardwell, had spent 26 years as a night auditor at a hotel much like this one. Not glamorous work, mostly invisible, the kind of job where you learned everything about a building's character by watching who it apologized to and who it didn't. Thaddeus used to say it at the kitchen table, so often that Elias could still hear the rhythm of it. "A building doesn't have manners, son. The people inside it do, and manners only count for something if they show up when nobody important is watching." Elias had built an entire company trying to prove his father right. That was why, twice a year, without notice, he traveled to one of his properties dressed exactly as he was tonight. A plain coat, no driver waiting curbside, no assistant calling ahead. He called it his quiet nights. His leadership team called it something closer to dread. Tonight had not been planned as one of them. Tonight was simply his daughter's first night back from 2 weeks with her grandmother in Charlotte, a late flight delayed by 90 minutes, and a decision made in an airport rideshare line that the Crest, his own flagship, for miles closer than his house, made more sense than dragging a sleeping 9-year-old across town at midnight. He had not expected an education, but here it was, arriving anyway, the way the truth usually did, uninvited, inconvenient, and exactly on time. Elias's blind spot, if anyone close to him had been asked to name it, was a quiet, stubborn faith in systems he had personally designed. He trusted his own architecture the way other men trusted family, fully, almost without examination. He had written the employee handbook himself in the company's 3rd year. He had sat through every leadership retreat, signed off on every training module, approved every mission statement banner hanging in every employee break room across all 19 properties. He believed, in the unexamined way a person believes a floor will hold their weight, that the values he built into the company's bones would simply keep holding once he stopped checking, that a strong enough foundation didn't need to be tested twice. It was a reasonable thing to believe. It was also, he was beginning to understand, as he stood in his own lobby being told there was no room for his daughter, not quite true. A foundation didn't ask to be tested. It just sat there, quietly, waiting to find out whether anyone was still paying attention to what had been built on top of it. His ex-wife, Camille, had told him something close to this once, the night she packed the last of her boxes out of their house in Atlanta. You think because you built something good, it stays good on its own. It doesn't, Elias. Nothing does. Not a company. Not a marriage. He hadn't fully believed her at the time. He'd been too tired, too defensive, too certain the real problem had been timing rather than attention. He believed her a little more every year since, mostly on nights like this one, when the gap between what he'd intended to build and what was actually happening inside it showed up uninvited, holding his daughter's sleeping weight against his shoulder. The manager's name was Garrett Holloway, and he arrived at the desk already wearing the expression of a man who had been told a story and had decided, before hearing the other side of it, which version he believed. "Sir," Garrett said, positioning himself just slightly behind and beside Priya, the geometry of two people standing on one side of a counter and one man standing on the other. "I understand there's some confusion. We don't have any rooms tonight. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I'll have to ask you to try elsewhere." "There's no confusion," Elias said evenly. "I watched a room get assigned to walk-ins 90 seconds after I was told there was nothing. I'd like you to explain that to me." Garrett's jaw set in the particular way of a man bracing rather than listening. "My staff exercises good judgment. I stand behind my team. I'm not asking you to throw anyone under the bus. I'm asking you to look at what just happened." "What just happened," Garrett said, "is that we're a private establishment and we've explained there's no availability. I'd ask you not to make a scene in front of other guests." Elias looked at him for a long moment, long enough that a woman seated near the lounge fireplace lowered her phone slightly to watch. He thought, briefly and without bitterness, of his father coming home from the night shift and sitting at the kitchen table in his coat for 10 full minutes before he could make himself talk, the particular tiredness of a man who has just spent 8 hours being polite to people who weren't polite back. Elias had inherited a company from no one. He had built every floor of it with his own decisions. But the tiredness, that, his father had handed down whole. He was not going to say who he was. Not yet. If this was happening here, at the one property meant to set the standard for the other 18, he needed to see exactly how far it would go before he did anything about it. "Your full name and title, please," Elias said. "For my own record." Garrett gave both, flatly, without asking why. Elias filed them away the same quiet way he filed everything, then carried Nora to a leather chair near the lobby center and sat down to wait. He noticed, in the minutes that followed, the kind of small details his father had once taught him to read like a second language. The reservation screen Priya kept glancing at was angled away from him, but not far enough. He caught the soft green glow of available room indicators still lit along one edge, the exact opposite of fully booked. He noticed that Garrett checked his watch twice, not out of impatience, but the way a man checks a watch when he is waiting for something to simply resolve itself through the passage of time rather than through any decision of his own. He noticed the elevator call button near the service corridor light up once, then go dark, as if someone upstairs had pressed it and reconsidered. None of it was proof of anything by itself. Stacked together, it had the unmistakable shape of a building running exactly as it had been quietly trained to run. He did not have to wait long for the rest of it. Garrett did not return to whatever managers did at midnight. He stood near the desk, with his arms folded, glancing over every 90 seconds or so, each glance carrying the same unspoken sentence. "You are still here, and I need you to not be." Elias noticed everything in that lobby the way he always noticed things, quietly, without performance. He noticed Priya's hands had gone still on the counter. He noticed a young man near the concierge station, nameplate reading Dante, watching the chairs out of the corner of his eye while pretending to organize luggage tags that did not need organizing. He noticed the couple from the lounge had stopped talking entirely, their attention drifting toward him without quite committing to it. It was the particular silence of a room full of people who sense something is wrong and are waiting for someone else to say so first. Garrett crossed the floor eventually, the way men cross floors, when they've decided to perform authority rather than simply have it. He stopped a few feet away and lowered his voice to the register reserved for things meant to sound private, while still being heard by everyone nearby. Sir, I've given you time. This is private property. I've explained there's no room, and continuing to sit in this lobby, after being told, that isn't something I can allow. I'm sitting in a chair, Elias said. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't disturbed anyone. You don't have grounds to remove me, and we both know it. I'm not asking, Garrett said. He turned and gave a short nod toward the far hallway, where two security officers had clearly been staged for exactly this signal, because they moved immediately, flanking Elias's chair, with the unhurried confidence of men who had done this particular maneuver before, though Elias doubted, watching their faces, that they'd ever done it to a man holding a sleeping child. It was the motion of the guards arriving that woke Nora. She came back to the world the way children do, not gradually, but all at once, blinking up into the chandelier light, taking in the two large men standing over her father's chair, Garrett's folded arms, the stiff quiet of the room, in a single sweep. She sat up against Elias's shoulder, gripping Pepper to her chest, and looked at Garrett with the plain, unguarded directness of a child who has not yet learned to pretend not to notice what she notices. Why do you want us to leave? She asked. Her voice was clear and unhurried, the way children's voices carry strangely far in quiet rooms. It reached the fireplace, the concierge desk, the elevator bank. Garrett didn't answer her. He looked at Elias instead, which was its own kind of answer. Nora considered that, working it through, with the careful seriousness of a 9-year-old determined to make the world add up correctly. If they don't want people here, she said slowly, why do they have a job that's about welcoming people? There was no accusation in that question. It was simply the honest curiosity of a child, and precisely because it was so honest, it left the entire room in stunned silence. If this moment touches your heart, take a second to subscribe and join us for more stories about dignity, kindness, and the truth of the human spirit. But what truly left the entire ballroom speechless was still waiting just beyond those elevator doors. There was no accusation in it. It was a sincere question, the kind only a child asks, because only a child hasn't yet learned that adults sometimes build entire systems around not asking it. But a sincere question, asked clearly in a quiet room, has a way of landing harder than anything rehearsed. Dante had gone completely still at the concierge desk. One of the security officers, the younger one, shifted his weight, an almost imperceptible discomfort, with where his own feet were standing. Elias looked down at his daughter. You didn't do anything wrong, Nora. Not one thing. He held her gaze, until she nodded, then looked back up at Garrett, whose certainty had cracked slightly, not into doubt, but into irritation, the particular irritation of a man who feels control slipping and responds by gripping harder rather than letting go. This has gone on long enough, Garrett said. Please escort them out. The guard stepped forward. Elias rose slowly, careful with Nora's weight, and did not resist, but he did not move toward the door, either. He stood in the center of the lobby he had built, with his own decisions, his daughter against his side, and looked at Garrett with the expression of a man who has finished gathering what he came for. Several phones had quietly appeared around the room, not held up, not performed, just angled, present, recording the particular geometry of the moment. A black father in a plain coat, a 9-year-old with a stuffed rabbit, 2 security officers, and a manager whose face had already decided the ending. Elias reached into his coat pocket, found his phone, and made a call. For sentences. 10 seconds of listening. He ended it and slid the phone away. Daddy, Nora whispered, just for him. Do we have to go? Not tonight, he said. We're not going anywhere tonight. Garrett took a step closer, patience visibly gone. Sir, I am telling you for the last. The service elevator chimed. It was a small sound, one the lobby produced dozens of times a night, without anyone noticing. Every person in the room noticed this one. The doors opened, and Renata Voss stepped out, CEO of Ashworth Hospitality Group, silver-streaked hair still damp, from a hotel room shower she'd clearly cut short, a coat thrown over pajama pants, because there had not been time to dress properly for whatever she'd just been told on the phone. Two members of the regional executive team followed half a step behind her, both moving with the careful urgency of people who understood exactly what they were walking into. Renata crossed the floor, without glancing at Garrett, without glancing at Priya, her eyes fixed entirely on Elias. "Mr. Bardwell," she said, the formality in her voice carrying real weight. "I am so sorry you were kept waiting." The room went quiet the way rooms do in real life rather than in films, not all at once, but sound by sound, until even the soft piano loop over the lobby speakers seemed suddenly, completely wrong for the moment. Renata turned to face the desk. "This is Elias Bardwell. He is the founder and majority owner of Ashworth Hospitality Group. He owns this hotel. He owns the desk you are standing behind, the badge on your vest, and the paperwork that determines whether any of us are employed here tomorrow." She let the sentence settle for exactly one breath before continuing. "I want everyone in this lobby to understand precisely what happened here tonight." The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. The man who had just been denied a room for his daughter turned out to be the owner of the entire place. If you love stories where the truth is revealed at the exact moment no one sees it coming, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss emotional twists like this one. But for Elias, revealing who he was had never been the end. It was only the moment when the truth finally began to be called by its real name. Garrett had not moved. Priya's hand had gone flat against the counter, as if she needed it to stay upright. Dante's eyes had widened, then dropped to the floor. Nora looked up at Renata, then at her father, then back again. "Daddy," she whispered, "you know this lady?" For the first time, since walking through the revolving doors, something in Elias's face eased completely. He tightened his arm around his daughter. "Yeah, baby. I know this lady." Nobody moved for a long moment. That was the thing Elias noticed most. Not triumph, not relief, just the strange stillness of a room that had been building towards something loud and had suddenly run out of momentum entirely. Garrett found his voice first, which was either brave or foolish, and turned out, as these things usually do, to be both. "Mr. Bardwell, I want to explain. We had no way of knowing the circumstances." "You're right," Elias said. "You didn't know who I was. That's exactly the point." His voice carried across the lobby, without effort, because everything else in the room had gone, so quiet it didn't need to be raised. "Everything that happened tonight happened because you looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the standard, not because of anything I said or did, but because of what I looked like walking through that door. And you did it in front of my daughter." Garrett opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out of it. "My father spent 26 years on a night desk in a hotel like this one," Elias said. "He used to tell me that a building's manners only mean something if they show up when nobody important is watching. I built this company trying to prove him right. Tonight you proved him right in a different way." He paused. "Garrett, you're terminated, effective immediately." Renata gave a short nod and stepped aside to make the necessary call. Garrett straightened his jacket once, the small, automatic gesture of a man trying to keep the last intact piece of his dignity, and walked toward the back office, without another word. Elias turned to the front desk. Priya had not taken what looked like a full breath in several minutes. "You made a decision tonight based on how someone looked," he said, not unkindly. "I want you to sit with what that actually means, not what it might cost you professionally, but what it feels like to be on the other side of it." He let that land before continuing. "You're not losing your job, but you're going into a retraining program that isn't about skills. It's about values. If you come out the other side and still want to work here, the door stays open. But what happened tonight cannot happen again, not to anyone." Priya nodded, a small movement, but a real one. Elias crossed to the concierge desk, where Dante had stood, through all of it, with his hands flat on the counter, wearing the particular tension of someone bracing to be blamed for something he hadn't done. "You saw it," Elias said quietly, just for him. "You knew something was wrong, and you couldn't say it out loud. That's not a failure of your character. That's a failure of how this building was being run." He let a beat pass. "But I watched you tonight. You tracked every part of what was happening. Something in you knew exactly where the line was, even when you couldn't cross it. That matters more than you think." He paused. "Starting next week, I want you in a guest relations supervisor role, here, at the crest. I need people in positions where they can actually act on what they already know is right. Dante's expression moved through several things before settling somewhere between disbelief and resolve. I won't let you down, he said. I know, Elias said simply. He turned back to face the room. The remaining guests watching openly now, no pretense, no phones raised, just people waiting to hear what came next. I've spent 14 years building this company, Elias said, and there's exactly one standard I've never been willing to negotiate. Every person who walks through our doors gets treated with respect before they've proven a single thing to anyone. Not based on what they're wearing, not based on what they look like at midnight, with no luggage. Every person, every time, without exception. He looked around the lobby, the walnut desk, the limestone floor, the brass fixtures he'd chosen himself, 14 years of decisions standing quietly around him. If anyone in this company can't commit to that, I'd genuinely rather they find somewhere else to work. Not as a threat, just as the truth of what this place is supposed to be. The room held the words for a moment. Then Nora, who had been standing beside her father, through all of it, with Pepper tucked under one arm, and the grave, focused expression of a 9-year-old determined to understand the world correctly, looked up and tugged once on his sleeve. Daddy, she said, can we get our room now? I'm really tired. Something moved through the lobby that wasn't quite laughter, but lived right next door to it, the particular sound a group of strangers makes when tension finally finds somewhere safe to go. Even Renata pressed her lips together against a smile. Elias looked down at his daughter's earnest face, her worn rabbit, her absolute uncomplicated sincerity, and felt the thing that had been sitting in his chest all evening finally shift. Not disappear, just settle into something, with more room in it. Yeah, baby, he said. We're getting our room. What came afterward did not stay contained to the crest. Within a week, Renata had pulled the mystery guest log Elias had quietly kept for years and used it as the spine of something larger. A formal, company-wide audit program across all 19 properties, no longer run only by Elias on his unannounced nights, but by a rotating panel that included former guests who had filed complaints. Visits would happen twice a year at every hotel, the findings published internally in full, and, for the first time, tied directly to management bonuses rather than buried in a file nobody outside compliance ever opened. Elias insisted on one further addition himself. Every front desk and concierge employee, company-wide, would complete the same values-based training Priya had gone through, not as a punishment reserved for one bad night, but as the baseline expectation for every employee from their first day forward. Garrett did not work in hospitality again, as far as anyone heard. Elias never asked, and never wished him worse than the ordinary consequence of a man finally meeting the version of himself he'd spent a career avoiding. Priya finished the retraining program in 5 weeks. She asked, on her own, to be the one who helped redesign its final module, the part new hires would sit through on their very first day, because, she told Renata, she wanted to be useful to whoever almost became her on some other night, at some other desk. Dante's promotion held. 6 months later, when a regional inspector toured the crest unannounced, she singled out the concierge desk by name in her report, describing the way the staff handled the delayed, exhausted family of 5, without a single raised voice or a single hesitation. Elias thought about his father more in the months after that night than he had in years. Not with sadness, but with something closer to recognition. A building doesn't have manners, son. The people inside it do. He had spent 14 years believing he'd built the manners into the walls themselves, into the handbook, into the brass, and the walnut, and the careful lighting. What he learned, holding his daughter in a lobby at midnight, was that manners didn't live in a building at all. They lived in whoever happened to be standing behind the desk when no one important seemed to be watching, and a company only kept its character by checking on that, again and again, instead of assuming the foundation would hold itself up forever. 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a family came through the crest's revolving doors, 2 travel-worn parents in comfortable clothes, 2 kids trailing behind, one of them dragging an oversized backpack and refusing, with the absolute conviction of a child defending a principle, any offer of help. Priya was at the front of the house that afternoon. She crossed the lobby to meet the family. Before they reached the desk, introduced herself by name, and asked what would make their stay easier. She didn't glance at their shoes or their luggage. She looked at the tired eyes and the stubborn kid and smiled the way people smile when they mean it, without having to think about it. Within 2 minutes, the parents' shoulders had dropped. Within 5, even the kid, with the backpack, had let someone carry it. In the far corner of the lobby, Elias stood with Nora beside him, there for a scheduled visit this time, a real jacket instead of a coat thrown on at midnight, though Nora had still insisted on bringing Pepper. They'd been standing there for 10 minutes, and he hadn't announced himself to the floor yet, because he wanted to watch this part first, the ordinary, unremarkable, everyday version of the thing he'd spent his whole working life trying to build. Nora watched Priya guide the family toward the desk, watched the kids brighten at something Priya said, then looked up at her father. Is that what it's supposed to look like? Elias watched the tired parents exhale. He watched the kid finally let go of the backpack. Yeah, he said, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Nora considered this, with the quiet thoroughness she brought to most things, nodded once, tucked Pepper under her arm, and reached up to take her father's hand. He held it, and they stood together in the corner of the lobby he had built, not as the man who owned it, just as the man who had once carried his sleeping daughter through its doors and learned, the hard way, that the things you build are only ever as good as the people you hand them to. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity before they prove anything, before they show what they have, before anyone decides whether they belong. That isn't just good business. It's just what's right. If this one stayed with you, stick around. There's more where this came from.